The fans will be very angry about this. To sign him, you're looking at a British record fee. Yeah, I'm not convinced by the Julian Alvarez links. I think people are sleeping on City a little bit. It comes down to whether Eddie Howe believes he can integrate him back into the group.
Hello, I'm Susan Owens and welcome to The Window, talkSPORT's daily video transfer update and your go-to guide for all of the big football moves. Today we will be talking about the latest in Isak versus Newcastle, and we're going to take a little look at how the Champions League will be impacted by this transfer window. To join me today will be talkSPORT's favourite European football expert, Kevin Hatchard. First of all, we're going to have to talk about the drama that has unfolded overnight between Alexander Isak and Newcastle. This does seem to be a new story every day with him, but he's released a statement during the PFA Awards, I might add, which was very smart. I did hear rumours that there were gasps around the room, where he accused Newcastle of broken promises, saying that their relationship cannot continue. Then, of course, Newcastle released their own statement explaining that Isak is under contract and there's no commitment ever been made to allow his exit. So with this going on and on, what do you actually think is going to happen in the end?
It's a really difficult situation because obviously the fans will be very angry about this. I imagine there'll be different views. Some might believe that Isak has a case to some extent if that's what he's been told by the ownership. But I would think the vast majority will be very angry. And this is always a difficult situation where a player that is really valued by a club clearly wants to leave. It's also further complicated by the fact that to sign him, you're looking at a British record fee. Now, it's clear that Liverpool have been interested in not just the summer, but before that. I mean, there were, rumours emerging as early as February, March that he was their dream target for the summer. I must admit, I did think when Newcastle qualified for the Champions League that'd be game over and that he would stay and he would probably sign a new contract. But there does seem to be a lot of anger about that contract situation. Isak felt he should have been offered a new deal. That didn't happen. He's seen what's going on at Liverpool. They're making exciting signings. They are the champions. They're going to challenge, you would think, for all the top honours. And I can understand why you'd want to make that move happen. But it's a very complicated deal to do. It comes down to whether Eddie Howe believes he can integrate him back into the group. If he can, then he's worth keeping. But if he can't, maybe Newcastle might have to compromise. But then they've got to get replacements. It's a mess, quite frankly.
It is for sure. And obviously we know that on Monday they are playing Liverpool. And the atmosphere there is bound to be quite uncomfortable. But do you think that there's any kind of strategy in there that maybe they're waiting until this game's over, last week the transfer window, and then they go, yeah, he's all yours, go for it. And we just blow by all of this madness that has happened?
I doubt it, because Eddie Howe doesn't seem the type to play those games, to encourage those games necessarily. And also I imagine that he would think Arne Slot and Liverpool wouldn't really be affected by any of that. So I imagine that is about the bigger picture. I don't think it's specifically about this game, but this game's always fiery anyway. It's been like that for years and years and years. We've had incredible games down the years. I thought some of the games last season were amazing. Obviously, Newcastle got that incredible League Cup win against Liverpool. Some of the league games were fantastic as well. So I don't think they're directly tied in, but of course it just adds to what is already quite a fierce northern rivalry anyway.
That's true. And if we keep an eye on Liverpool, they've made a lot of signings this season already, or in this window, but Giovanni Leone has signed for the team and seems absolutely buzzing about it. He's already spoken about how he really wants to play with Van Dijk, and he's made up with the idea, and he's been signed for 26 million and is one of the most highly rated young centre-backs in the world. But what do you think he could actually bring to Liverpool as a team?
Yeah, I think if you look at his performances for Parma last season, it showed that he can operate at a high level. He certainly didn't look out of place when they were playing some of the big hitters like Napoli and Juventus. And he's got all the tools that you need. He's tall, he's strong. But I think the most important thing is actually the mental side of the game. He's very calm, reads the game well, doesn't dive into challenges. And you're talking about a guy who's just a teenager. So if you think what he can learn from Virgil van Dijk, who, as you say, is his hero. He's only going to get better. The big hitters in Italy wanted to sign him, and I think Liverpool have pulled off something of a coup by getting him.
So you think there's kind of like a lot of longevity, like maybe he'll stay at Liverpool for a long time as well?
Yeah, I think that'll be the aim. And I think it says a lot that Liverpool haven't loaned him out immediately. That's an area that Liverpool absolutely needed to strengthen. I imagine they'll still pursue Mark Gay if they think that's a deal that they can do, because otherwise you are just looking at Virgil van Dijk, you're looking at Konate. You don't know how many games Joe Gomez is going to be able to play over the course of a season. Leone, I actually think, could do a job. If you put him in there, they wouldn't want to do that immediately. But I think he's shown in Serie A that he's capable of stepping up to the challenge. So it'd be fascinating to see just how often he plays this season.
Yeah, and Liverpool are also keeping their eye on Alvarez as well. And their plan to kind of strengthen their attack, I think they are picturing that he would be a key player in that. I mean, journalists, fans seem keen on it, but do you actually think that could be a viable option for them?
Yeah, I'm not convinced by the Julian Alvarez links. I know that there's been talk recently that his entourage feel he's made a mistake by joining Atletico. I don't see that in his performances. He scored a brilliant free kick against Espanyol at the weekend, even though they went on to lose the game. And the move to Madrid was all about him being the main man. It was all about him being the focal point. Obviously, it helps that he's in a Spanish-speaking country. And I think that this was the right move for him. I don't see why, after a year, he suddenly returns to the Premier League, having left Manchester City. He was a treble winner. I don't really see... Obviously, Liverpool have huge pull. I get that. But I just don't see why he makes that move so early. So any kind of move for Alvarez does seem fanciful at this stage. And actually, if you look at Atletico's spending, they're trying to build a team around him. They're trying to build a competitive team that can actually challenge in the Champions League and in La Liga as well.
Yeah, do you think players that kind of move from Europe are looking at Premier League teams and thinking like, oh, I want a bit of that action? When, like, really in the last few years, you kind of almost see a lot more like competitiveness and like intrigue, I would say, in Champions League, La Liga, like all kind of like the German leagues and stuff, more so, I'd say, than the Premier League.
I think the Premier League's a really big draw. I think if you look at what a lot of players say when they come to the Premier League, especially some of the younger ones, you think how strong the league's been in the past decade. That's what players have looked at growing up. You know, they've looked at these teams, they've looked at these battles, and it really appeals to them. You know, big stadiums, full stadiums, great atmospheres. The money helps. The fact that Premier League clubs can actually pay, you know, really competitive wages. They can actually afford these players. I think the big shift has been teams like Milan, for example. I mean, Milan's an enormous club in terms of European history, in terms of the Champions League, for example. But they're being competed with by teams like Bournemouth and Brighton and teams like that. Now, that's not being condescending to Brighton or Bournemouth, but it shows how far they've come and the financial strength of the Premier League. So I do think it is a very different picture now, and you are still getting players really lured to the Premier League. But Alvarez is a bit different because he's done the Premier League. This move to La Liga was about him doing something a bit different where he was higher up that pecking order.
Yes, yeah, I would have thought so as well. And like when you look at stories like Tottenham Hotspur, you know, getting closer and closer to signing Eze, and Eze's kind of main focus being, I want to play in the Champions League. Do you think, like in your experience of, you know, being around these windows, do you think that the Champions League is really kind of the draw that you can get, like, you know, bringing people over? Like, how much could they really kind of dangle that in front of people to make a deal go through?
Yeah, the Champions League is absolutely a draw. There's no doubt about that. Players want to be on the biggest stages. They want to play in the biggest games, and that's what the Champions League is. So, you know, going back to what we said at the start, that's why I thought that Newcastle had a much better chance of keeping Isak, because they'd qualified for the Champions League. I think if they'd missed out on that, that probably would have been nailed on that he was going to go. What I didn't necessarily anticipate was Isak pushing really hard to leave, and I think that was always going to be the thing that would change the dynamic. Him actually saying, look, I don't want to play here anymore, I do want to move on. So yeah, the Champions League is a big draw for so many players, But of course, if you're then trying to move to a different club that's in the Champions League, that changes the picture.
When you look at the transfer signings that have already happened, with clubs like Chelsea and Arsenal and, everyone in the Champions League, how do you think it's going to look this season? Who do you think is going to come out on top?
Yeah, I think it feels like it'll be between Liverpool and Manchester City for me. Arsenal will be in the mix. There's no doubt about that. But already they've had an injury to Kai Havertz and they've had all kinds of injury problems in the last year or so. I still think Arsenal, without the ball, are the best team around. The problem's going to be how do they turn those draws into wins. I think people are sleeping on City a little bit. I think they're looking at what happened last season and drawing too many conclusions that they're not going to be in the mix. But look at the players they've signed. Reinders is unbelievable in midfield. Ryan Cherki, I think, is terrific and could be anything he wants to be. Haaland is always going to score goals. And I think defensively, they've been helped by Ait-Nouri, because Ait-Nouri will allow Gvardiol to move into the centre-back role, and that's probably where he's meant to be long-term. So if Rodri's fit for most of the season, and that's a big if, I think City will be right up there with Liverpool. But I think you look at Florian Wirtz for Liverpool. I know it was a slow start for him. He'll get there. He's a really exciting player.
Yeah. And just lastly, just to chuck in, are there any other players that are doing really well in Europe that you think more clubs in the Premier League should be having an eye on in this window?
I think there's some interesting ones. I think you look at somebody like Ademola Lookman, for example. He's been trying to push through a move to Inter for a long time, but Atalanta haven't been playing ball. So I think that's one that teams should probably keep an eye on, I would think. You look at some of the more imaginative moves. I think Bournemouth have done a great job in bringing in Amin Adli. I think that's really smart because he won the league with Bayer Leverkusen, and I think he's perfect for them. He'll press really well. He's mega quick. And I think what we saw with Forest recently, signing Arnaud Calamuendo, that he was a player that lots of Premier League clubs looked at, didn't quite pull the trigger. And they've brought in a guy that has really improved in the last couple of years. Left foot, right foot, scores headers, great movement. So what it shows is that if you're imaginative enough and you're willing to take a risk on some of these players, Evan Gesson has just gone to Villa, I think is the same. There are bargains out there, and that will only get more true as we get towards the end of the window and some teams who need the money and need to sell start to panic.
Okay, great. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks a lot.
Well, there you have it. And remember, the window will be back again tomorrow with all of the latest done deals, rumours, and pretty much everything in between. The window is in association with our own bookie, talkSPORT Bet. Download the app or head to talksportbet.com if you want to get involved. 18 plus, T's and C's apply. BeGambleAware.org.